The night should have ended in laughter. 4 friends, diplomas still warm in their hands, piled into a silver sedan to celebrate the end of college and the beginning of everything else. Witnesses saw them leave a crowded parking lot just after midnight, music loud, headlights sweeping across campus one last time. By morning, the car was gone. No calls, no texts, no trace. Families launched frantic searches. Detectives chased dead-end leads. Rumors ranged from accident to pact to something darker. For 8 years, the case sat unsolved. Another cold file. Then a box of old receipts surfaced during an audit at a rural gas station. One slip was dated that night. The time, pump number, and signature told a different route entirely. Commencement at Riverbend University always felt like a festival. On May 24th, the quad was strung with banners, families crowded the lawn, and graduates tossed their caps into skies that promised futures. Among the hundreds were 4 inseparable friends: Claire Moreno, poised to start law school; Ethan Price, the quiet computer science major; Rachel Lynn, whose laughter filled every dorm hallway; and Marcus Hale, the athlete with a grin that could disarm professors. They had spent 4 years side by side, cramming for finals in the library basement, sneaking into the campus pool after hours, whispering secrets in the dining hall at 2 a.m. Graduation wasn't just an ending, it was their final binding ritual. That evening, families drifted home, dorms emptied, and the friends gathered one last time. They packed into Marcus's silver Honda Accord, its back seat strewn with half-empty water bottles and folded gowns. The plan was simple: drive into town, grab food, and maybe head to the lake where seniors traditionally partied until dawn. They joked about who would get nostalgic first, who would cry, who would be the last to leave town. Surveillance cameras captured them pulling out of the university parking lot at 12:11 a.m. Claire leaned out the window to wave at classmates. Rachel threw a peace sign. Music pulsed through the open windows, the rhythm of youth and endings. But after that, the trail bent toward silence. When morning came, parents expecting tired but happy calls received none. Claire's mother rang her cell again and again, straight to voicemail. Ethan's roommate said his bed hadn't been slept in. By noon, worry turned to panic. Police were notified, and the silver Accord was entered into the statewide missing vehicle database. Searches spread quickly. Helicopters swept the nearby lake. Volunteers walked highways, scanning ditches. Tips poured in, sightings of a car at a diner, rumors of an argument at the party, whispers of a secret trip. Each theory flared and collapsed. Days stretched into weeks. Posters with 4 smiling faces faded on telephone poles. The Accord never surfaced. Families clung to each other, bound by grief that hardened with each unanswered anniversary. The case calcified into rumor. Some said the friends had run, staging their own disappearance. Others imagined a crash into some unseen ravine. A darker few whispered about abduction. And then, 8 years later, a gas station audit in a forgotten town unearthed a single receipt. Time-stamped, signed, dated graduation night. It was as if the friends had reached across nearly a decade to say, "We were here." Riverbend's campus woke to a story that did not fit its postcard. By mid-morning after graduation, the university police chief stood in front of microphones set up on the steps of the administration building and announced what parents already feared. The 4 graduates and their car were missing. Behind him, banners that had read, "Congratulations, class of," fluttered with a cheer that felt suddenly cruel. In the first 48 hours, the investigation was kinetic. Patrol cars traced likely routes, from campus to the lake, from the lake to town, from town to the interstate on-ramp. The lake was searched as if the water itself were suspect. Divers moved in grid patterns, pulling up sodden fishing line, a set of keys to an unrelated pickup, a bike frame furred with algae. No Honda, no debris field, no answers. Detectives canvassed the party at the lake. A dozen seniors swore they saw the Accord arrive around 12:30 a.m., music thumping, headlights sweeping across the lot. Someone remembered Marcus high-fiving a linebacker friend. Someone else remembered Rachel twirling in her sandals, laughing at the cold, hair pinned with a bobby pin shaped like a star. But memory bent under cross-examination. One witness placed the car there, another swore it never showed. Photos taken on old phones were grainy, streaked with firelight. Nothing caught a license plate. Back in town, a diner server said 4 kids matching their description ordered fries and milkshakes at 1:10 a.m. The manager said the time was 12:50. The receipt roll had been changed that morning. Timestamps drift when humans meet machines with sleep in their eyes. Investigators logged it, then learned the camera behind the counter had skipped that hour entirely. A power flicker. Summer storms toyed with Riverbend's grid. Parents arrived fast. Claire's mother wore the same dress from commencement, as if clothes could hold a door open to yesterday. Ethan's father carried a notebook and wrote down every name the detectives said aloud. Marcus's older brother took over logistics, call trees, meal trains, search sign-ups. Rachel's aunt set up a table near the student union where volunteers could pick up stacks of flyers with 4 faces printed beneath the word "missing" in a font too loud to bear. Rumors thickened. A professor admitted he'd heard talk of a graduation pact, like those whispered urban legends where friends vow to disappear rather than grow apart. Detectives weighed it and set it aside. There were no withdrawals of cash, no burner phones activated, no tickets bought. A rumor about a fight, Marcus and an ex, raised voices, made the rounds, and then died when the ex produced messages full of benign congratulations. By day 5, the search left the campus bubble. State police took lead. A helicopter traced highways out of town, thermal camera turning night to grayscale day. Callers clogged the tip line with sightings. A silver sedan at a rest stop 2 hours east. A car, weaving on County Road 9, headlights idling outside a shuttered storefront. None stuck. The friends' rooms were searched with parental consent and trembling hands. Claire's desk held index cards arranged in neat stacks, case law terms, deadlines for scholarship applications. Ethan's shelves lined with worn paperbacks and a tiny soldering iron kit. His laptop yielded nothing but code and playlists. Rachel's corkboard bloomed with Polaroids, goofy, tender, ordinary. Marcus's gym bag lay open, a pair of clean socks folded on top, as if he had meant to come back and didn't. A week stretched to 2. Hope thinned into a string pulled between families who had never met before, but now finished each other's sentences. Clips of the 4 grinning in caps and gowns looped on evening news as if repetition could compel return. Students left town for internships and first jobs, carrying the story like a superstition. Drive safely. Text when you get home. Don't take back roads. Investigators, lacking a locus, built one. They circled the last certain sighting, the university parking lot at 12:11 a.m., and measured outward. Traffic cams along the main drag were audited. The Accord never flashed across their lenses. A license plate reader near the county line was down for maintenance that night. A construction detour pushed cars into neighborhoods where doorbell cams were still the exception, not the rule. The case sat in a blind spot between analog habits and digital oversight. By late June, the task force shrank. The detective in charge, a patient woman named Perez, stood on the campus steps again and said the words, "Families dread but expect." We are not closing this case. We are moving to the next phase. In the crowd, Claire's mother looked at the banner that still hung. Someone had forgotten to take it down, and then she looked away as if the sight alone could wound. Years lacquered themselves over the story. The dorms refilled with new lives. The lake parties happened anyway because ritual runs deeper than caution. The case became a campus legend you told incoming freshmen. Don't drive out after midnight. Don't cut down Stone Quarry Road because it's faster. Don't believe graduation night ends just because the speeches do. What no one knew, what no one could have guessed, was that a thin slip of thermal paper with an inky stamp, an ordinary gas station receipt, was sitting in a shoebox 2 counties away, waiting for a boring corporate audit to pull it into light. It had a time, a pump number, and, in a rushed hand, a signature that didn't belong to any clerk on duty. It wasn't proof of everything, it was proof of somewhere. And after 8 years, somewhere was everything. 8 years later, the disappearance of the Riverbend Four was spoken of in past tense. Their faces still appeared in news roundups about cold cases, their names sometimes invoked at campus vigils. But the search had dulled into ritual. Families, aged into grief, detectives rotated out, and the silver Honda became less a car and more a myth. The receipt came from chance. A regional gas station chain was consolidating records, clearing old boxes stacked in a storeroom above the office. An assistant manager tasked with shredding noticed one bundle stamped with the wrong year. Curious, he flipped through the brittle thermal slips. Most were smeared into illegibility. But one caught his eye. May 25th, 2010, 12:47 a.m., graduation night. The header named a station 30 miles south of Riverbend on a county road few students used. Pump number 3, 4 gallons of fuel. The bottom line bore a signature scrawled in pen, required then for card verification. It wasn't the cashier's, who later swore she'd been the only one on duty. It was shaky, rushed, but legible. M. Hale. The manager froze. He remembered the story. He called his supervisor. Within hours, the slip was in an evidence bag at county headquarters, its numbers still sharp, its edges curling like a document determined to survive. Detective Perez, still with the case, though promoted to captain, drove out herself. She stared at the thin strip of paper under plastic, reading it over and over as though repetition would unlock more than time, pump, gallons. It was the first verifiable data point since the campus parking lot. The implications spread in waves. If Marcus had signed, then the friends had driven south, away from the lake and the interstate. If they had fueled at 12:47, they'd been alive and together more than half an hour after their last confirmed sighting. The station sat on a lonely road, flanked by farmland and patches of pine, a direction no one had seriously considered. Perez pulled the old surveillance logs. The cameras had been long since replaced, but digital backups were still archived on disks. One showed the lot, grainy and black and white. At 12:46 a.m., headlights rolled in. The car was silver, 4-door. At 12:47, Marcus stepped out. Even blurred, his stride was recognizable to those who had studied him. He swiped a card, pumped fuel, signed the slip, and returned to the driver's seat. Behind the glass, 3 shapes moved. Passengers alive, present. At 12:49, the car pulled out. No one had ever seen them again. The receipt cracked the case open. Investigators redrew the map. Theories about the lake, the interstate, even voluntary disappearance lost weight. The friends had gone south, toward back roads, abandoned quarries, and a stretch of land where maps faded into pale green. The families wept, not from closure, but from proximity. They were alive, Claire's mother whispered, holding the evidence photo. Ethan's father pressed his hand flat against it as if to touch the ink. 8 years of silence had ended, not with a body, not with a confession, but with proof that for a few minutes more the 4 friends drove together under a canopy of night, their route real, their story still running. The receipt didn't just point, it aimed. 30 miles south, a 2-pump station sat at the bend of County Road 217, the kind of place where the coffee was always 10 minutes old and the only light after midnight was the soda machine glow. Detectives rebuilt that hour from whatever the past had bothered to keep. First, the lot cam. Grainy as snowfall, but faithful. At 12:46 a.m., the silver sedan noses in, pauses as if the driver's weighing direction, then lines up at pump number 3. The figure who steps out has Marcus's height and shoulders. He swipes, pumps, glances once toward the store window where a tired clerk counts singles. At 12:47, he signs the slip. At 12:49, headlights angle left, south, not back toward Riverbend. The Accord eases into the dark like a fish rejoining current. Inside, the clerk on duty that night remembered only fragments when Perez sat her down 8 years later. 4 kids, she said slowly, as if pulling rope from a well. Caps and gowns in the back seat. I thought they'd been at graduation somewhere. She remembered the driver's smile. Polite, rushed, and the girl in back tapping her fingers on the window to a song the station radio wasn't playing. She couldn't say which girl. Her register tape showed no purchase. Fuel had been paid at the pump. But her lot journal, a habit from robberies years earlier, had one penciled note and a doodled arrow under 12:45. Silver Honda, out-of-town plate. Perez drove the route herself that afternoon, windows down, radio off. County 217 unspooled between soy fields and pines, intersected by gravel lanes named for families and creeks. 15 minutes south, a flashing barricade sign blinked roadwork. Used detour, a dated leftover from the previous spring when the county had resurfaced a half-mile. The detour arrow pointed toward Stone Quarry Road, a shortcut locals used even when the main drag was open. 8 years earlier, the sign had been fresh. If the friends followed it, they'd have turned west toward hills that hid a lattice of forgotten access roads. Maps poured onto the task force table again. Parcel maps, timber company plats, DOT detour schematics. An engineer remembered that in 2010, a low-water bridge 3 miles south of the station had washed out for a week. Contract crews had thrown up detours that funneled cars into the quarry's service road, whether they meant to go there or not. The county replaced the bridge fast. The detour signs lingered, like ghosts do. Detectives canvassed the quarry town that had once fed stone to half the state. Night clerk at the only motel remembered nothing. The owner of a 24-hour diner remembered everything. Kids came through graduation week every year, she said, always taking pictures on the big stone blocks. I hated it. Liability. She didn't remember these 4, or maybe she did, and time had folded the faces together. Back at the gas station, Perez noticed something the first pass had. Missed. At the edge of the lot cam's frame for 3 seconds, the station's air compressor light flickered. Pressure drop, then normal. It could have been nothing. It felt like a shadow of something. She walked the concrete, a faint crescent of tire chalk, the kind mechanics use to mark valve stems, stained the air hose cradle. Marcus could have checked pressure, or someone after him. Still, if they'd been worried about a soft tire, the detour's gravel would have been a bad choice. Unless the sign had felt official enough to trust. Perez pulled records on the Accord, maintenance notes from campus fleet services. Marcus had borrowed a University Bay the week before graduation to change oil. The mechanic joked in a margin. Kid keeps that thing cleaner than my kitchen. Tires were near end of life but legal. A soft edge to one note. Front right slow leak? No follow-up. A sheriff's deputy ran the card logs for that night. No other charges hit after the fuel. No snacks, no tolls, no hotel. Phones? All 4 had gone dark near campus. Tower pings dropped into silence. If they'd driven into a dead zone of cell coverage, the map would have looked exactly like this. Blank between Riverbend and the Quarry Hills. They drove the detour at night, headlights low, radio whispering the news about a graduation somewhere else. Stone Quarry Road narrowed to 1.5 lanes, trees leaning close enough to make a tunnel of leaves. 30 minutes in, the asphalt surrendered to gravel and washboard. The forest pressed in with the old, indifferent patience of land that had outlasted dozens of stories. At a bend where a creek undercut the roadbed, Perez stopped. An old guardrail ended abruptly, replaced by splintered posts and a run of cable wire installed after a teenager went over the edge in 2006. Behind the posts, Kudzu draped the slope like a curtain. She stared at the drop, then at the map notes. No skid marks documented in 2010, no debris then. But 8 years of storms can shake loose what one night hides. A wrecker brought for a later sweep nosed its crane arm toward the creek. Divers scheduled a recheck. Rains had lowered. Visibility might be better. The team marked 3 other trouble spots: a blind S-curve, a shoulder collapsed to shale, and the narrow traverse above Horseshoe Cut, an old quarry trench partially flooded since the 90s. In 4 miles, a dozen ways existed for a car to leave the road. In 8 years, brush had done its quiet work of forgetting. Perez went back to the station one more time as the sun fell, stood where the camera had stood, and replayed those 2 minutes. A silver car, a boy smiling with the specific relief of having gas at midnight, a pen scratching an initial on a thermal slip, 3 silhouettes inside. Then taillights shrinking south. To most eyes it read ordinary. To hers it read pivot. The moment a story stepped off the map, everyone had searched, and onto one no one had believed mattered. When she briefed the families, she didn't promise. She laid the receipt down first. Then she laid a county map next to it, a line drawn in red from pump number 3 to the detour sign to Stone Quarry Road. "This is the path we never searched," she said softly. "This is where we go next." Claire's mother traced the red line with her finger like a rosary. Ethan's father nodded once, as if counting. Rachel's aunt whispered, "We told people they went to the lake." Marcus's brother swallowed hard and said what no one wanted to admit. "We told the story wrong." They would fix the story, or try. The road south had waited 8 years for eyes that knew what they were looking at. Now, at last, the route had a name, a direction, and a first mile that was no longer imaginary. The work ahead was not romance. It was gravel, mud, water, and the stubbornness of trees. It was also, finally, a place to put boots. Daybreak found the task force staged at the orange detour sign like runners at a starting line. Cones went down, a total station leveled, and a drone rose with a wasp's whine to stitch aerials of Stone Quarry Road into a single ribbon. Where maps had once been theory, they were about to become measurement. They split into 2 teams. Roadside walked the shoulders with probes and magnets, eyes tuned to colors, roads try to swallow, factory silvers, brake light reds. Water moved ahead to culverts and low-water bridges, shining poles into mouths where creeks gulped gravel, and secrets. A third, smaller group, slope, roped up along the worst drop-offs, following kudzu curtains to where gravity collects mistakes. Within an hour, the road began confessing small sins. At mile 3.1, roadside lifted a sliver of headlight polycarbonate, its fracture pattern consistent with a Honda of the right era. Not proof of this Honda, too many cars share DNA, but the right language. At mile 3.4, slope called up a lug nut, half-bedded in clay, stamped with a manufacturer's mark, the campus mechanic later said matched the Accord's wheels. At mile 3.7, water flagged a culvert where flood debris had braided around a license plate bracket. No plate, just the frame, cracked at the screw holes. Perez didn't celebrate. Pieces of cars migrate. They get kicked down shoulders, washed into culverts, swapped by accident. What she wanted was convergence. 3 signs in one place, a chorus that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. They found it at the blind S-curve where the asphalt had heaved into a ripple and the inside shoulder feathered into nothing. Kudzu had webbed the outside drop so thick it felt like a wall. Slope sank anchors and went over, vanishing into green. 10 feet down, a tangle of vine lifted under gloved hands to reveal a rub strip, the long plastic seam from a rocker panel. It was silver under road grime. 2 feet below it, something brighter winked in mottled light. A piece of taillight lens, candy red, its fracture glittering like a cracked gemstone. Perez felt the shift, road, slope, water lining up. She called the wrecker crew forward. The crane arm arced, a saw snarled through vine trunks as thick as wrists. Kudzu fell in lush ropes, revealing a slope of river-stained rock and, farther down, a gleam where rock turned to pooled water. Divers slipped in, visibility arm's length at best, hands reading the bottom. 5 minutes in, a diver surfaced, tapped his helmet, and held up an OK sign punched with urgency. He'd found paint. They cleared more vine. The slope tilted steeper, funneled into a shaded gully where the creek slowed to a dark ellipse. The drone pointed down, something rectilinear hid under silt at the pool's lip. Not fresh, the lines were softened, edges furred by algae, but not a boulder either. The wrecker's cable snaked down, a grappling hook seeking purchase. Twice it slipped, the third pull caught. The cable tightened, the crane leaned, and something heavy shifted underwater with a sucking sound that made everyone flinch. Mud geysered. A roofline rose, silver blurred by silt, then slid back, the hook tearing free. The crew cursed softly, adjusted angle, tried again. On the fourth pull, the car broke surface like a creature dragged from myth. Slab-sided, roof crushed by years of weight, windows blown by water pressure. The oval of a Honda badge glowed under grime. Silt belched from doors as tires cleared rock and swung to air. A necklace of kudzu clung and then let go. The cable groaned, slewed, and the wreck settled onto the asphalt, ancient and immediate at once. Silence, and then the disciplined bustle of a scene coming alive. Tarp erected. Cones pushed back. Cameras rolled. The VIN plaque, when wiped, matched Marcus Hale's Accord. 8 years of rumor condensed into steel and glass under a thin skin of mud. Perez put a hand on the fender, not for sentiment, but to steady time. She radioed the families with a phrase she had practiced and still barely managed. "We have recovered a vehicle consistent with your loved ones. We are proceeding with extreme care." The car's interior held water and leaves and the nested detritus of seasons. The driver's airbag had deployed, its fabric hung in gray tatters. The passenger bag had not. Back seats were a drift of silt and maple helicopters. In the debris tray by the shifter, a bobby pin shaped like a star lay bright as if set there yesterday. A bead bracelet, blue elastic snapped, hid under the rear bench. The dash clock, when power was carefully introduced, flickered and showed 12:53 before dying, its last remembered moment, give or take. Power loss and water's cruel arithmetic. There were bone fragments, small and few, in places car wrecks keep secrets, under the seat rails, caught in carpet. The coroner worked with gloves and tweezers and the hush that good work requires. She wouldn't say more that day than the necessary words. "We will do this right." Back at the S-curve, Perez walked the inside shoulder where no skid marks scarred the asphalt. Old tar snakes gleamed. If Marcus had lost the lane, it wasn't in a panic stop. It was in a drift compounded by washboard and a slow-leaking front right tire and midnight, and the kind of detour sign that makes bad decisions feel official. A clean strike to the outside edge, a slide through kudzu, a plunge masked by summer growth and 8 years of leaves. An accident that had waited for a receipt to aim eyes the right way. Reporters would later ask why no one found the car in 2010. Perez would say what the map showed: wrong search area, wrong assumption, wrong direction. She would also say what the roadside taught that day. Roads forget fast when vines are allowed to remember for them. When she briefed the families, she placed 4 objects on the table, each in its own evidence box: the bobby pin, the bracelet, the headlight shard, the receipt. "This is the route," she said, voice steady. "This is where the story went." Claire's mother reached for the star and didn't touch it. Ethan's father closed his eyes. Rachel's aunt traced the bracelet through plastic with a fingertip. Marcus's brother whispered, "We told the story wrong." And this time, it wasn't accusation. It was relief edged with ruin. The wreck would go to the lab. The curve would get a new guardrail. The receipt would be scanned until its ink threatened to fade. And the map of a night that had been myth for 8 years now had landmarks so ordinary they hurt. Pump number 3, a detour arrow, a blind S-curve, kudzu that worked like a curtain. What remained was the question that keeps even solved cases awake. Was it only the road, or had someone else touched the night? Another car, a chase, a push? The car's crushed roof and quiet airbags would have their say. So would paint transfers, if any survived. But already the story had moved from campfire legend to physics, from rumor to slope and speed. The road south had not just aimed them, it had kept them. The rest would be pulled, inch by inch, from mud. The Honda Accord was hauled under tarps to the state forensic garage, a warehouse that smelled of oil, steel, and the quiet gravity of things once lost. For investigators, the car was less a vehicle than a time capsule, a chamber where 8 years of silence might finally crack. Technicians began with the exterior. The roof was caved inward, its steel bowed as though an invisible hand had pressed it down. The windshield had spiderwebbed, its fractures clouded with silt. Kudzu roots clung to the wheel wells. On the passenger side fender, a faint smear of paint, not factory silver, but forest green, caught the team's eyes. Samples were scraped, sealed, logged. If another car had nudged them, even once, the color might testify. Inside, the work was slower. Seats had collapsed under water weight, cushions rotted to a damp mulch. Still, beneath layers of muck, the Honda had memories. In the driver's side footwell, a fragment of shoe sole clung to carpet threads, size 11, athletic style. Marcus's brother confirmed he wore that exact brand, a gift from the basketball team booster. On the passenger side floor, investigators lifted a plastic cup lid stamped with the logo of a Riverbend diner. Stuck to it were 2 strands of hair, long and dark. DNA would later confirm they belonged to Rachel. The back seat held stranger things. Wedged between cushions was a phone charger cord, its end frayed but still wound around itself in a neat coil, the way Claire was known to roll cables. Next to it, a folded pamphlet advertising the Quarry Town's diner, ink blurred but headline legible. Pie served all night. The paper hadn't been there long. Water damage suggested weeks, not years. Detectives debated. Had someone entered the wreck after it sank, planting it? Or had it drifted in from creek debris? Most haunting were the personal traces. In the debris tray sat Rachel's star-shaped bobby pin, logged earlier. Under the rear bench, the snapped blue bracelet that Ethan's sister had woven one summer at camp. Each object was proof not of accident alone, but of presence. The friends had lived inside this metal box until the moment gravity and water claimed them. Forensics studied the airbags. The drivers deployed on impact, leaving faint fibers embedded in the wheel's plastic. The passenger bag had not fired, possibly due to a faulty sensor or because the seat's weight reading was just under threshold. In the back, no airbags existed. Regulations then hadn't required them. The coroner's team sifted carpet seams and seat rails with tweezers. They found bone fragments no larger than coins, too degraded for certainty, yet consistent with juvenile and young adult profiles. Tooth enamel slivers, enamel white, even after years, suggested at least 2 individuals. Families were told gently, identification would take time. But the Honda spoke in subtler ways, too. When a technician restored partial power, the dashboard flickered. The trip odometer read 31.2 miles, almost exactly the distance from Riverbend's lot to the gas station pump. The fuel gauge sat just under 3/4 full, consistent with a 4-gallon top-off. The clock, briefly alive, glowed 12:53 before dying, a time impossible to verify, but aligned with everything else. Perez stood in the garage as the evidence was catalogued. To her, the car's message was clear. The friends had driven south, alive, ordinary, filling gas, talking about pie or parties or futures until the road bent them into silence. What remained uncertain was whether the S-curve had claimed them alone, or whether the smear of forest green on the fender told of another presence that night. When families were brought in, each reacted differently. Claire's mother touched the bobby pin case as though it were relic. Marcus's brother stared at the shoe sole fragment, fists clenching. Rachel's aunt whispered over and over, "She was here. She was here." Ethan's father stood apart, eyes on the green smear photo, and asked the only question no one could yet answer. Who else was on that road? The Honda had returned, but the night still held shadows. Laboratories have their own kind of weather, hums, hisses, and the tick of instruments that turn suspicion into numbers. The smear on the Honda's fender went under a comparison microscope, slivered into flakes so small they moved on a breath. Layer by layer, the profile emerged. Primer gray, adhesion coat, then a forest green top coat, baked with metallic fleck, uncommon in consumer lines, but standard in fleet paint for a 10-year run across multiple states. The binder chemistry, resin ratios, pigment signature narrowed it further. Not a Ford, not Toyota. The chart's needle settled near GM Fleet Green, used on state forestry vehicles, some county road trucks, and a handful of quarry company SUVs retired in 2012. Perez felt the circle tighten. If the Accord had brushed another vehicle, it wasn't likely a joyrider in a random green coupe. It was something that belonged on Stone Quarry Road, work rigs, night patrols, trucks that owned gravel the way deer owned the tree line. They built a list: County Road Department, State Forestry, the quarry's private security. And because small towns bleed categories, they added a final column: contractors, men paid in cash to move cones and check things after hours. Records are the bones of bureaucracy. Sometimes they still have meat. The county produced maintenance logs for 2010. A green Chevy 2500 assigned to night checks on 217/Stone Quarry during the bridge outage, repaired in early June for a dented rear quarter panel. The work order description was bland, impact with vegetation, but the invoice from a body shop 50 minutes away noted paint blend on rear passenger quarter. The truck had since been auctioned to a farmer. Its trail went cold in a field full of hay. State Forestry's fleet list turned up 3 Tahoes painted the exact green, one stationed out of a district garage 2 ridges over. None showed repairs that summer. But a retired ranger tracked to a cabin with a failing porch remembered something else. Security at the quarry ran blazers that color, he said. Old ones? Faded. Company didn't like to spend on new. The quarry had changed hands twice since 2010. The new owner produced a box of archived records that smelled like damp limestone and neglect. Security logs were spotty, photocopied, until the numbers went fog-soft. Still, one sheet survived for the week of graduation. A night guard, D. Keene, clocked in at 11:40 p.m., out at 6:05 a.m. Keene, when found, was washing dishes in a different town under a different manager. He'd been 23 then, bored out of his skull. "We weren't supposed to patrol the public road," he said, "just the gates. But sometimes I drove out to smoke." In what? An old green Blazer with a spotlight that barely worked. Any memory of a silver sedan out there? He rubbed his forehead. Every car I saw that week had seniors hanging out the windows. That night? I don't know. Maybe paint alone doesn't. Prove push, it can be transfer from a brush with kudzu-draped metal, an abandoned gate, a utility box. Perez asked the lab for height analysis, where on the Honda's fender the green smeared. The answer came back like a pin, finding a map center. The streak rode 28 inches off ground, arcing forward, consistent with a rear quarter of a higher vehicle moving ahead and right, impossible to get from a stationary object on the slope they'd mapped. If the Accord slid into and under vines, the smear would mark low and backward. This one suggested a nudge on the curve's approach, a kiss of metal that shifts a lane by inches, enough to make gravel bite. A trooper added a physics overlay: speeds at midnight on washboard, tire load with a slow right front leak, lateral forces on a car entering an S-curve. "You don't need a deliberate pit maneuver," he said. "You need a truck drifting wide, a driver half asleep, a mirror-to-fender touch at the wrong second." Malice wasn't required. Presence was. They hunted the county truck first. Auction ledgers took them to a farm where a green Chevy hulled corn. Under flaking paint, the rear passenger quarter wore a repair seam, bondo feathered thin. Perez's tech scraped microscopic samples. Chemistry matched the smear on the Accord, GM Fleet Green, same fleck, same binder. But the timing, repair in early June, cut both ways. Graduation night was May 24th into the 25th. A late May push, a June repair, clean fit, or the truck had kissed any number of things before someone finally spent a requisition to fix it. The foreman who'd signed the work order had retired. The body shop boss had died. Quarry Security's blazers were ghosts. Titles had lapsed, VINs went to scrap. One rumor said a rancher bought one for parts. Keene insisted he'd never left the gate that particular night. He also admitted falling asleep in the shack after 2 a.m. "Look," he said, "no one cared. We were guarding rocks." A sliver of clarity came from a trucker who had run aggregates out of the quarry for 20 years. He remembered Detour Week as a mess. In a sworn statement, he said he'd met a county green Chevy coming out of Stone Quarry Road around 1 a.m., once or twice. "They ran soft edges, checking cones," he said. "Guys got overtime. Some of 'em took the curve like it was midday." He rubbed at a scar on his knuckle. "I told one to slow the hell down. He laughed names?" He shrugged. "Memory doesn't do payroll." Perez walked the S-curve again at dusk, body remembering it now in boots. She paced the inside line, where a car hugs to be safe, then the outside, where a wider vehicle might float. She could feel in her feet how a careless inch becomes geometry, how two machines decide, without malice, who gets gravel. She thought of Marcus at 12:49, full of gas and future, taking a detour he'd been told to trust, meeting a green truck whose driver thought a cone line was a suggestion. She wasn't ready to say push. She was ready to say touch. The families deserved more than a theory. The lab came back with one more number: zinc chromate trace in the green paint, an anti-corrosion pigment phased out in consumer lines by 2007 but still present in municipal fleet stock into 2011. The quarry's private rigs, older and badly maintained, were less likely. County trucks, more. The county risk manager sat under fluorescent lights and called the finding interesting. Perez called it directional. "We are not suing you," she said, letting the words cool between them. "We're trying to finish a map." Reporters asked if the case was now a hit and run. Perez said what she could. The car had been found. Evidence suggested contact with a fleet-painted vehicle. Investigators were interviewing drivers who had worked that corridor. Off camera, she said what she believed, that 4 bright lives had met a series of small, ordinary hazards: leaky tire, midnight, gravel, a detour, and one other that wore county green. Whether that contact was criminal, negligent, or just a shrug of physics would be a fight between lawyers and time. For the families, it meant the story contained someone else's name, even if the file never printed it. That night, Claire's mother dreamed of a map where the red route line brushed a second line painted green, and the place they touched glowed. She woke before dawn and wrote a sentence she hadn't allowed herself in 8 years. They didn't choose the dark road alone. In the garage, the Honda sat quieter, catalogued to stillness. What remained were the last chapters, coroner reports, notifications, a measured answer at a podium. The receipt had pointed the way. The paint had pointed back. The road had kept its secrets only until someone asked the right question in the right color. The coroner's report arrived in sections, each one folded like a letter families never wanted. Bone fragments yielded mitochondrial DNA consistent with Claire and Rachel. Tooth enamel suggested Marcus, though degradation blurred the certainty. Ethan remained a gap, no identifiable sample, though absence did not prove survival. The report's language was careful, clinical, but to families it read as a conclusion. The car had been their tomb. Perez gathered them in a quiet municipal hall rather than the press room. Evidence photos lined the table, the receipt, the Honda, the bracelet, the star-shaped bobby pin, the smear of forest green. Each object was both wound and suture, proof of a night both ordinary and catastrophic. "We cannot give you the hour by hour," Perez said softly. "We can give you the path." She laid it out. Pump number 3 at 12:47 a.m., 30 miles south. A detour sign, an S-curve where physics and vines conspired. A green truck whose paint rode Marcus's fender into mud. An accident, almost certainly, she said, but not only accident. The parents listened indifferent, postures, leaning forward, staring at the floor, gripping hands. Marcus's brother asked the sharpest question. "Do you have a name?" Perez shook her head. Evidence pointed toward a county fleet truck, one repaired weeks later. The driver, whoever he had been, was retired or gone. "We may never have more than direction," she admitted. Closure, the word reporters like, didn't fit. The families wanted something else. Return. And so, under controlled light, the coroner released remains, small as they were. A joint service was planned in Riverbend's chapel, the same one that had echoed with graduation speeches 8 years earlier. The campus bell tolled again, not in celebration, but in mourning, woven with memory. Students who had been freshmen in 2010, now grown with careers and children, returned to stand in pews. Professors wept quietly. A photograph of 4 friends in caps and gowns stood at the front, framed by lilies. Outside, rain fell in thin curtains. Families placed the bobby pin, the bracelet, the fragments, into urns that weighed less than grief. Claire's mother whispered, "You're home now." Rachel's aunt pressed the star pin into her palm until it left a mark. Marcus's brother carried the urn as if it weighed the world. Ethan's father clutched the absence like an object of its own. Reporters later asked Perez if the case was solved. She said, "We recovered the vehicle. We recovered remains. We reconstructed the route. That is the truth we can hold." But the unanswered hung heavy. Who drove the green truck? Did contact push fate, or did it merely brush a path already bent? Was negligence the villain, or was it just a night where too many small hazards aligned? On Stone Quarry Road, the county replaced the guardrail and paved the washboard. A sign now reads, "Sharp curve, reduce speed." Few who drive it know the story. But at the S-curve's outside edge, hikers sometimes find small offerings, flowers tucked into cables, a star-shaped pin clipped to wire, a receipt folded into a cairn. Markers, quiet but insistent, saying they were here, they mattered. In the task force archive, the case file closes with a page stamped in bold, concluded, unresolved, because even when the road is mapped, the weight of proof leaves questions that paper cannot answer. And in Riverbend, when the campus bells ring for graduation each spring, someone always ties 4 ribbons to the chapel gate: blue, red, silver, green, threads of memory that remind every passerby. The story did not vanish. It was written into roads, receipts, and paint, and it waits in silence for eyes that know how to read it.